I see the coffee. I can take a hint. We're almost there, okay? We're going to move on to the Shymel Drinks murder from March 14th, 2022. And there are several counts regarding this case. Count 49 charges my client, Mr. Stillwell, with murder. Mr. Kokomo, if you could show 50. 50 charges participation in criminal street gang activity based on the murder. 51 charges criminal street gang activity based on the murder. And 52 charges possession of a firearm by a convicted felon for March 14th, 2022, based on the belief that if a murder was committed by Mr. Stillwell, he must have had a gun. And count 54 is charged possession of a firearm during commission of a felony, being the murder. My point is all of these counts are predicated on the murder charge. And so I'm not going to focus on any of the other counts. I'm just going to focus on count 49, which is the murder charge. Okay, so turning the page to the March 14th, 2022 Shymel Drinks murder case. Let's start out by just reviewing kind of the basic evidence, standard evidence, and then we're going to get into some of the more complicated matters that came up during trial. There's no eyewitnesses. There's no DNA. There's a fingerprint that was briefly alluded to that was found on Shymel Drinks' car that does not belong to Mr. Stillwell or anyone else in this case. There's no ballistic matches. We know that the projectiles or the bullets that hit Mr. Drinks twice, once in the neck, once in the arm, we know that they were .40 caliber bullets. Okay? That's what we know. What else have we heard through trial? We heard about a phone that Mr. Stillwell had. We heard a lot of his songs off that phone, and we also heard about some other things. We heard about a article that Mr. Stillwell, or someone with Mr. Stillwell's phone, we'll say Mr. Stillwell, clicked on March 17th, 2022. Okay, it was a Fox News article about a shooting on Windsor Street. Okay, that's 3 days after the homicide. That is after Mr. Stillwell's girlfriend at the time, Miss Alexander, alerted him to the fact that there was a shooting on Windsor Street. It's after the fact, it's after she sent a post posted by someone else on Instagram about this shooting on Windsor Street. It's after his grandmother, Miss Jackson, reached out to him to check if he was okay because she saw the news report about this shooting on the news. All that happened on the evening of March 14th. That's how quickly news traveled. It should be of no surprise that by March 17th, probably sooner than that, there was an article about this incident on the internet, on the Fox News website, the local Fox 5 website. Mr. Stillwell clicked on an article 3 days afterwards. Additionally, we heard about Mr. Stillwell being in we know that he's in the rap, or he's trying to make his way in the rap game, and we know that on the evening of March 14th, going into March 15th, Mr. Stillwell was in the studio. And we know there was a note in his phone that talked about a very standard, very common, not a particularly unique line at all, not unique at all, to be quite honest, from drill music, about ops. That was put in his notes while he was in the studio making drill music. So we have that. Neither of those two things in his phone are particularly noteworthy. They're not strong evidence of anything. But they were brought to your attention by Investigator Viverito, who searched his phone far and wide for any information she could find, and that was what she found. We heard about social media posts. And we heard that those social media posts were collected by Investigator Viverito. And we went back and forth with Investigator Viverito, we being me, about her work collecting those posts. There's no reports on who she was following, what she was looking for, who she was checking out on Instagram, who she wasn't checking out on Instagram. We also know from the post by Mr. Nichols that was presented to you initially in a far different form than it was actually on the internet, that Investigator Viverito was not only collecting posts, but she was manipulating posts to present to you in the way that she deemed fit, because she is biased. We learned that there were several people that made posts about the goings-ons in March of 2022. We know, and I'm not going to hide from it, that Mr. Stillwell made posts about Maine Christian McMiller's death on March 11th, about Darius Ford's death, about how his heart is broken, about how he ain't going to be the only one crying. We know that there were posts on both sides from everyone in the community about what was going on in March 2022. But the takeaway from the post is this, and it actually came from Investigator Viverito. I don't think she really wanted to admit it, but she did. We talked to her about the March 11th killing of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford, and about that investigation. Now we're talking about 2 years and 8 months ago now. How it remains unsolved, how no one's been charged. Okay? And we looked at some of the posts that were made in reference to that incident. We learned about a Big Nick who posted just after that incident, slime and chalk. And we know what that, it's pretty self-explanatory. And we know about these other accounts. Edgewood, I think it was Edgewood James and Joey Hurst, two other accounts that weren't necessarily their names, may have been kind of like pseudo accounts or fictitious accounts, celebrating in really the most vile ways possible, celebrating the deaths of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And I asked Investigator Viverito, and she confirmed, even if they're fictitious accounts, you can see who was posting. You could pull an IP address. You could try to look into that and figure out who was posting. If you really thought that these posts, if you really thought posting about the crime was a confession to murder. And she agreed, she could, but they didn't, because it's not. We learned about Kelvin Watts, also known as Shell Cal. And we saw the post that he made right after the murder of the double homicide of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford, about him putting 2 shells under Donovan Thomas's eyes, about him looking in the camera and putting 2 shells under his eyes. 4 different posts. Another post about with 2 shells and lips sealed. And we talked to Investigator Viverito about what those shells meant. And they meant bodies, in her estimation. So Kelvin Watts is sitting there posting, putting symbols of dead bodies under his own eyes, in his own way with the shells. And I asked Investigator Viverito, and he also made a song. We heard about the song he made, Mafia Story, where he's celebrating the death, where he's describing the death, how they were in a fast car, and how they died on the freeway. Direct references to the death of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And so I asked Investigator Viverito, all these posts that Kelvin Watts has made, has he been charged? And the answer was no. And why was the answer no? Because posts on the internet about the death of people, even claims of responsibility, such as putting two shells under your own eyes. That's not enough to charge someone. That's not a confession. Investigator Viverito said the reality is, in this day and age, under these circumstances, dealing in this situation with the drill music and everything else, there's false claiming going on all the time. We can't go by what's on the internet. We can't go by what people post. That's not a confession. That's what we learned from Investigator Viverito. That's what she was forced to concede when we talked about the Christian McMiller and Darius Ford deaths. So when we're analyzing crude, inappropriate, idiotic posts that are made by Demekion Garlington, or even my client, Mr. Stillwell, let's keep that in mind. Those aren't confessions. Those are posts, and they're common. And even Investigator Viverito, who I have maintained pretty clearly is not an honest broker, was biased, even she had to admit that. Ballistics is interesting because we know about the FN that Mr. Stillwell is allegedly being linked with. 5-7 FN. And that was always a hole in the state's case, right? Mr. Drinks was shot with a .40 caliber bullets. Mr. Stillwell has never been linked to any weapon that shoots .40 caliber bullets, at least not in 2022. So Investigator Viverito shows up in court, looking to put her stamp on the case, looking to sway the jurors. And she looks at a video. And she says, yeah, on that table, I think that's a Glock 27 based on the bottom of the grip. I'm not an expert. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just going to kind of hypothesize in front of the jury that it's a Glock 27, and they shoot .40 caliber bullets. Okay, you're not an expert, but you're throwing that in front of the jury. Never said it before until you're on the stand. And what's your experience with Glock 27s? Well, one time I went to the gun store and I was trying to decide what kind of gun to buy, and I held a Glock 27. That's it. Think about Investigator Viverito and her bias and her trying to sway you and identify or claim to identify a firearm and a make and model from that picture and what her basis is, what her real basis is. Any evidence that Mr. Stillwell ever possessed that gun? And what did she say? She just can't answer no, because of course there's no evidence that Mr. Stillwell has ever possessed that gun. She says, well, do you have any evidence? Or I don't have any evidence that he didn't. Well, geez, that's an interesting shifting of the burden of proof from the state's witness. She's biased. She came in there to try to solve a key problem of the state's case, which is that Mr. Stillwell is not linked to any weapon that could possibly shoot the fatal bullets in the Shymel Drinks case. And she tried to solve that problem for the state with her little trick and her little identification based on one-time handling a gun in some pawn shop or some gun store somewhere. Don't fall for it. It just shows her bias. So we heard the wiretaps. State brought on the wiretaps. And yes, the wiretaps do show Mr. Stillwell. We heard a call with Mr. Stillwell laughing about sneaking out when the police showed up. and talking about taking a stick and his FN from the house after the police showed up. We own that. We acknowledge that. Neither of those guns could shoot the bullets that killed Mr. Drinks. But there was another wiretap that was played that I'd like us to just hear again. And Mr. Kokomo, you know where I'm going? Okay. It was from a call on April 1st, 12:29 a.m. And the state made such a big deal of this. Of course, the wiretap, hold on one second, just don't play it yet. Thank you. The state made a big deal of this because it's a wiretap. Demekion Garlington's on one end on his cell phone. And the state made such a big deal about Mr. Stillwell, what he was doing on this call on April 1st. Of course, we know he was in jail. He'd been arrested on March 17th. So he's in jail, and he's talking to Demekion Garlington. And they make a big deal. He's on a contraband phone. He's on a contraband phone. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but let's think about that scenario for a second. We've been sitting here for a year listening to the same. This call is subject to being recorded, right? Every time someone comes from the jail, because it is recorded. Mr. Stillwell's on a cell phone. He doesn't know Mr. Garlington's phone is tapped. Mr. Garlington doesn't know his phone is tapped. As far as they're concerned, they're having a private conversation. They have cut out the recording and are having a private conversation about March 14th, 2022. And what do they say? First, Mr. Kokomo, could you play 239 to 310?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I was telling folks. I'm like, shit, what the hell they locked up for? Like, they just saying about it. I'm like, bro, they good. I'm just like, they gonna assume some shit like that anyway. They gonna assume that, like, oh, like, y'all ain't did, ain't kill me, so.
That's what I keep telling Lil. I keep telling him, like, just chill. Like, I know,
Yeah, cause they saying he panicked.
Yeah, I'm like, this ain't nothing, bro. Like, they just doing that cut. It seems as it got gas station. Like, just chill. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In this private conversation that they're having, they're not saying, oh, how can we cover this up? Oh, I think they're onto us. Oh, no, I think they got us. They're saying, we didn't do anything. They're just assuming we did stuff because we're at the gas station, which is a fact that we have never denied. They were, in fact, at the gas station. They're having a private conversation, and they're talking about how innocent they are and how the police got it wrong, and Mr. Stillwell is just saying, let's let it work itself out. So let's go to 1210 to 1225, Mr. Kokomo. Thank you.
Yeah, I already know, like, when they got down, go to wiping down, doing them got down, them you know, how they gunpowder, forensics, all this shit there.
Yeah.
You gonna come back clean, you see what I'm saying? So I ain't tripping on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's consider that comment. First of all, no one said the car has been cleaned. It's going to come back clean, is what was said. And now, listen to what Mr. Stillwell says. Once they GD going to wipe it down, doing GD, you know, the gunpowder forensic, all that S-H-I-T, the gunpowder forensic, does Mr. Stillwell sound like an expert in gunshot residue there? Does he really sound like someone that's going to say, oh, I have so much inside knowledge on this forensic work that the police do on the inside of cars that we must clean the headliner of all things? No. He sounds like someone who knows that they were in a car on March 14th, 2022, knows that they were at the BP, knows that they left and they drove down Windsor Street, and knows, despite the fact that he's been arrested falsely for killing another gentleman, he knows in his heart that no gun was fired by him inside that car or outside that car. That's how he knows it's going to come back clean. It's not some devious mastermind that's got some inside information on the forensic work. He barely knows what he's talking about. You know that gunpowder forensic? All that SHIT. That's the comment of someone that knows where they were on March 14th and where they were driving and what they did not do. And what they did not do was fire a gun. Let's talk about the rental car. State made a big deal of this rental car. Yes, Mr. Stillwell rented a car on March 14, 2022. First of all, we've seen the BP tape. There was no plan, okay? This was a chance encounter. It was unforeseen that Shymel Drinks would ever show up at a gas station. So there's no indication that people would be renting a car in anticipation of running into Shymel Drinks, okay? The reality is we heard about what was going on in Mr. Stillwell's life. We know from his phone. We heard from Miss Alexander who testified. Remember what she said? March 9th, I was robbed. I said she's in the cash business. She said, no, I dance. Okay, that's fine. I didn't want to put it out there, but she did. She dances. She carries large amounts of money. And people ran up on her with their guns out and tried to rob her. Remember what she said? I said, you shot at them in self-defense. She said, no, I shot them. She didn't have any remorse about that because people ran up on her to try to take her stuff at gunpoint. But she was concerned about the blowback. She was concerned about people coming back to get her. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Stillwell has had a target on his back since 2015. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Ford and Mr. McMiller were just ruthlessly murdered on the freeway while driving in a car that obviously someone knew who they were and had an idea of what kind of car they were in. Is it really any wonder why a car was rented by Mr. Stillwell and Miss Alexander on March 14th? If it's such a secret, if there was such a plan behind this car, isn't it odd that Mr. Stillwell, first of all, they ordered it online ahead of time. Mr. Stillwell walks in there on surveillance, gives his ID, gives his name. It wasn't no secret. They were renting a car because things had gotten dangerous. They were trying to survive. And then we make a big deal of these tints. Yeah, they did put a tint on the car. That was kind of the point. That was exactly the point. No one's hiding from that. Mr. Stillwell was scared for his safety. He was scared for Miss Alexander's safety. And the first thing he did that night is went and got window tints on the car. And yes, he broke the rental agreement in doing so. We acknowledge that as well. If this was a car that was involved in a homicide on March 14th, let's consider Mr. Stillwell's actions after the fact. I don't know. It seems logical to me that if I'm in a rental car and I use it as part of a homicide, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of said rental car. Distance myself from the rental car. It's on video at the BP. It's on video on Windsor Street. There's surveillance cameras all over the place in Atlanta. The first thing anyone would do if they committed a crime as heinous as this in a rental car is to get rid of it. Well, what do we know that Mr. Stillwell does? Well, first of all, he runs into Investigator Viverito at 2830 Waters Road a day after the homicide, wearing the same clothes he was wearing in the BP, by the way, not really concealing his identity there. And He tells investigator Viverito, yeah, that's the car I'm in. That's the car I'm riding in. And then what does he do later in the day on the 16th? Does he go into Griffin, Georgia and burn it in some back road somewhere? Does he go drop it off in Alabama? No. He calls Alamo and extends the rental until the 20th. Ask yourselves, really? Are those the actions of someone with a guilty conscience? Are those the actions of someone who committed a crime in a rental car? Absolutely not. Why is he doing these things? Because just like how he knows the car is going to come back clean, he knows he didn't do anything in that car. He knows he's innocent. He has no reason to get rid of the car. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Melissa Sims Stanley. She was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Shymel drinks. She was very important. We didn't realize how important she was at the time, but she was very important. She testified that there were 2 wounds to Mr. Drinks, one to his arm and one to his neck. We don't know which order they came in, but we know the shot to the neck was the fatal injury. It caused a massive injury to the base of his skull and the base of his brain. Dr. Sims Stanley testified about the effects of such an injury. Death would be immediate, and if not immediate, imminent. But more importantly, conscious control of bodily movements would be immediately lost due to this massive injury to the base of the brain. The ability to move body parts up and down would be immediately lost. That came out in her testimony. Now the state followed up and said, is it possible if Mr. Drinks' foot was already on the brake when he was shot, is it possible for his foot to remain on the brake? And Dr. Sims Stanley's answer was yes. And of course it is, because staying on the brake does not require any conscious bodily movement. But on cross, I asked a very simple question. Is it possible, after being shot, that shot in the neck, that Mr. Drinks would be able to actively move his foot up and down off the brake? And unequivocally, with no hesitation, Dr. Sims Stanley said, no, that would not be possible. It would not be possible for Mr. Drinks, after being shot in the neck, to move his foot up and down off that brake. And we're going to get to why that, I'm certain many of you know why that's important, but we're going to get to why that's important in a minute. Let's talk about gunshot residue. Detective Hogan was the lead detective in this case. We know, much like the video, he took out warrants without ever having watched the video in this case, the FedEx video. He relied on a FedEx employee to describe it to him. We also know that he didn't wait for any gunshot residue results to come back before taking out warrants either, before assuming the guilt of my client, Mr. Stillwell. He, in fact, when he testified, he seemed unaware that there was even any gunshot residue tests performed or anything had been collected. But then we talked to Antoinette Green, who was the crime scene tech, who processed the the white Audi. And she processed the red Versa, but she processed the white Audi. And she informed us that it was in fact Detective Hogan who requested that she collect the headliner for the purpose of testing for gunshot residue. And I asked crime scene tech Green, did that seem like an appropriate request to you? Collecting the headliner to test for gunshot residue within that car. And she said, yes. The location seemed appropriate, the location of the headliner seemed appropriate, and the fabric that the headliner was made of made it a very appropriate piece of the car to collect, to be later tested for gunshot residue. And so she collected it. In fact, she didn't just collect the part over the sunroof, she cut out around that part as well and collected it all and sealed it up just like she does in every other case. She did her job, she collected it, she sealed it, and she sent it to GBI for testing. I asked scientist, Mr. Colvin, who tested for gunshot residue. I said, well, how about you? What is your thoughts? You ever test headliners before? Yeah, all the time. Okay, does that seem an appropriate part of the car to collect, to test for gunshot residue? Absolutely. The fabric is the type of fabric that would tend to hold on to the gunshot residue, to maintain the gunshot residue as opposed to someone's hands or something like that. And also the location is very appropriate. So we heard what Mr. Colvin did. We heard about his process, which is all by the books, all by procedure, how he dabbed that headliner. And he didn't just use one tab, he used two. And he dabbed that headliner again and again and again until one tab lost stickiness, and then he moved to the other tab and continued to dab. And what is he dabbing for? Microscopic particles of gunshot residue that are emitted from a gun when it is fired. And he takes these tabs that he's been dabbing on the headliner, and then he looks at it under a microscope, under an electron beam, to look for microscopic particles, of which there are many emitted from a gun when it is fired. A plume of them are emitted from the gun when it is fired. And he looked under that electron microscope, and his results were negative. And what does negative mean? Negative doesn't mean, oh, it's under some threshold, under 5 per cubic foot or anything like that. Negative means zero. Zero particles collected off that headliner that was collected from the white Audi. So, of course, we're going to talk about the video. The video that Investigator Viverito couldn't wait to talk about when she was on the stand, and I wanted to ask her questions about other things. The video that Detective Hogan had not watched at the time that he took out warrants for my client. Mr. Kokomo, could you pull up the video? Okay. And I just want to give a little timeline of what I submit we're going to see from this video. We're going to see 3 cars in a line. We're going to see a 4th car, a white car, pull up behind Mr. Stillwell in a driving fast. We're going to see Mr. Stillwell pull off. 16 seconds later, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off. 16 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has been long gone. 18 seconds after Mr. Stillwell leaves, we're going to see a 5th car make an unexplained U-turn. 30 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights flicker on and off again. And finally, for a 3rd time, 33 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off once again. Investigator Viverito wasn't correct. It doesn't happen one time. The brakes go on and off 3 different times in this video. And we're going to watch it. Okay, right here, we have 3 cars lined up. Mr. Drinks, red verse on the left, Mr. Stillwell in the white Audi in the middle, and Mr. Nichols and Mr. Boyer, according to the state, and Mr. Farley in the right. I invite you, when you're deliberating, I invite you right now, when you're deliberating later on, if you need to review this video, you can look as many times as you want. I want you to look to see if you see a muzzle flash. At any time when Mr. Stillwell's car is next to Mr. Drinks. We see a 4th car speed up behind Mr. Stillwell. Pause. And Mr. Stillwell leaves. What's going through Mr. Stillwell's mind right now? Is it that common theme of drill music that he knows about? Red light? Is it Future's song Red Light? Yeah, and this shit real out here, running through the red light, looking through your rear view, and might just sneak up on the car and try to spray you? Is that what's going on in Mr. Stillwell's mind? Is that what he's thinking about as he sees this 4th car speed up behind him? Or maybe he's thinking about that night, September 26, 2015, when he was in that car with Tierra Jones in this Duncan, and that car sped up behind them and started spraying the car they were in through the rear windshield. Either way, Mr. Stillwell gets on. Mr. Nichols, apparently confused, is trying to figure out what's going on, and he eventually leaves as well. Okay, pause. Pause. Okay. That 4th car, not Mr. Stillwell's car, that 4th car that has never been identified, has never been tested for gunshot residue, is now next to Mr. Drinks. And there's a 5th car driving up the street, driving up Windsor Street. And let's see what happens. Stop. Okay, back it up, Mr. Kokomo, a couple of seconds. Okay, pause. Okay, I want you to look closely. Right here, we're going to see the 5th car make a sudden U-turn. Is there someone in the street? Is there someone waving at that car to make that U-turn? Is there an obstruction? Is there anything going on that would explain why that car makes that U-turn at that exact time? No, there's not. There's one explanation. Hold on, Mr. Kokomo. There's one explanation and one explanation only. That car hears a gunshot. And while that car makes a U-turn, I want you to look at Mr. Drinks' brake lights. They flicker on and off. That means he's not dead. He has not been shot in the neck yet. That's science. That's from Dr. Sim Stanley herself. What could be happening, I submit to you, because we don't know the order of the wounds, what could be happening, what makes the most sense, is that at this exact moment, that car that's next to Mr. Drinks fires a shot into the car. And remember, there's 2 wounds to Mr. Drinks, but there's really 3 shots, because one projectile ends up going into his arm, and it's on the seat, and is collected by Miss Green, CST Green. Another projectile ends up, sadly, in his body, and is collected by the ME. A 3rd projectile goes through Mr. Drinks' car, because we see the exit wound, where the bullet exited Mr. Drinks' driver's side front door. So there's at least 3 shots that are fired into Mr. Drinks' car. I submit to you, at this exact moment, first shot is being fired, that car hears it, is making a U-turn, and Mr. Drinks is trying to react, perhaps moving around, going up and down off the brake, trying to figure out what's going on, perhaps trying to find the firearm that he has in his car, trying to figure out what's going on, as he's certainly not anticipating or expecting to be shot at that exact moment. That car, that white car, remains next to Mr. Drinks. Up. Back it up, Mr. Kokomo. And before he leaves, we see a slight flicker of the brake light right there. And then if we play it again, and no more flickers. At that moment, tragically, the fatal shot was fired from that 4th car into Mr. Drinks' red Versa, going into his neck, causing him to immediately lose all bodily control, and eventually leading to his imminent death. And that white car, that 4th car, leaves the scene. That last brake light flicker was 34 seconds after Mr. Stillwell had already left. It is scientifically impossible that Mr. Stillwell killed Mr. Shymel. Couple that with the gunshot residue test that proves that a gun was not fired from the car. Couple that with Mr. Stillwell's behavior, him not distancing himself from the car, but extending his rental. Couple that with the call that we heard on the wiretap of him and Mr. Garlington speaking candidly, talking about how the police are just making an assumption that they know they did nothing to Mr. Drinks. This case is clear. Mr. Stillwell, as convenient as it is, inconvenient as it is for the state to admit it, he didn't kill Mr. Drinks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to conclude. For nearly a decade, the prosecution, the police, the gang investigators, they have focused on this group of people. Jeffrey Williams, Shannon Stillwell, and many others. They're young men that grew up in hard times and had dreams of their own. They saw something different in Mr. Williams, a confidence, an ability to turn negative to positive, like so many hip-hop artists before him. They were attracted to Mr. Williams. They identified with him, but they also saw opportunity to chase their own dreams, to get in the studio, to make connections, to hopefully make it big. And it worked out for some of them. Wooney Lee is now a signed artist. He's not alone. But for nearly a decade, these gentlemen have been followed on social media. Prosecutors and police officers have listened to their music, have scrutinized their artistic expression, leaving no room for artistic license, leaving no room for hyperbole. They've searched residences, they've taken jewelry, they've seized cars, they've subpoenaed phone records. They've taken people's cell phones, they've extracted the contents of those cell phones, they've tapped phones, and most egregiously, they have systematically sought out people. People that are so weak, so scared of jail, so scared of the consequences of their own action, that they are willing to lie on others to save their own skin. And they have systematically sought out those people. And systematically sought out those people at the very time when those people were in crisis. And they've made threats to those people about how they're going to be locked up for decades, not get out till they're 48 years old. And they've made implicit promises to those people. Help me help you. You're a small fish. We're interested in the big fish. I'll be on the phone with the DA as soon as we are done. This ain't 68 plus 1. I'm not going to do you and you owe me one. It don't work like that. You have to give information. You're an armed career criminal. You're going away for 25 years, no parole. It's all up to you. They're going to ask, what did he do to help himself out? That's the game, the sick game that has been played, that's built this case from its inception. It needs to stop. For over a year, the prosecutors and gang investigators in this case have had their hammer out, trying to bang that square peg, their evidence, into that round hole, which is their narrative. And it still doesn't fit. It never will fit. That album cover that they tried to bang on and make it be a gang declaration of war, it never was, it never will be. That video of Antonio Sledge that they claim is an overt act, that they wouldn't, where Antonio Sledge is threatening another man because they're both having sex with the same lady, and he's upset and he's in his emotions. Remember that? And how they wouldn't let Antonio Sledge enter a guilty plea. They wouldn't let him go home to his sick mother, go home to his kids, until he signed the plea deal that said that somehow that this is gang-related. Just banging, trying to make it fit. Of course it wasn't gang-related. They're both having relations with the same girl. It was over a girl. It had nothing to do with gangs. But they try to make it fit. 24M on an end's head. They say it's putting money on someone's head, ordering an assassination, and they bang and try to make it fit. Of course it had nothing to do with that. We all know what that was about. And that gang investigators do it too. No rules, no initiation, no jumping in, nothing that is synonymous with gangs as we know it, letting whomever wants to be part of the group in on their own terms, out on their own terms, worldwide, people identifying with YSL, and they bang and try to make it something it's not, and label it a hybrid gang. Think about the FedEx video. How many different versions did we hear? How many different hypotheticals from the state? Oh, no muzzle flash, must have been shot inside the car. Oh, well, no GSR, must be shot from outside the car. Oh, well, the windows were just tinted, can't roll down the window, must have opened the door. Oh, no GSR, must have been cleaned. Oh, no evidence of it being cleaned, must have been vacuumed. Oh, or maybe scientist Colvin with the GBI, maybe he tested it incorrectly. Maybe he only dabbed on certain parts that didn't have GSR, as if GSR all accumulates in one little spot, as if it's not a plume, as if it's not all over an object where it's shot. These are all their theories that they try to use. Oh, the GSR must have fallen off in the bag, the sealed bag, this bag that was sealed and protected from the elements, just like every other piece of evidence they use in prosecutions of other cases. Just throwing stuff out there. Just continuing to try to bang, 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 bang. Just make it fit. Make it look good. It's never going to fit because it's not the truth. They don't have an explanation of why that car did a U-turn. There's only one logical explanation. They don't have an explanation for that negative GSR test. They don't have an explanation of why their own witness, a doctor, the ME, said that upon that shot, all bodily control would be lost. And we see the brake light go on and off 3 times after Shannon Stillwell's gone. They don't have explanations. But they just want to bang, 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 and try so hard to make it fit. I've had enough of the hammering. I've had enough of the square peg. I've had enough of their narrative and their theory. It's been a year. It's time to put the hammer down. Let's follow the evidence and not the state's narrative. If we follow the real evidence in this case, not what they're trying to sell you, you will come to the conclusion that the state has not proven count 1, conspiracy to violate the RICO Act beyond a reasonable doubt, and you will return the only just verdict in that case and find Mr. Stillwell not guilty. If we follow the evidence and not the narrative about count 2, Donovan Thomas, you will find that the testimony, the uncorroborated testimony of admitted liar Kenneth Copeland and admitted liar Quindarius Zachary is woefully insufficient. That there's reasonable doubt all over the place, and you will find Mr. Stillwell not guilty of count 2. And if we follow the evidence, you will find that not only has the state not proven that that Shannon Stillwell shot Shymel Drinks. Not only have they not proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's crystal clear that Mr. Stillwell did not commit that crime. And the only just verdict for counts 49 through 54 will be not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time and attention.
There we go. Time for Doug.
Let's look bridge real fast for me.
They're going to probably talk about scheduling. I've got to ask Chad a question. Do you think, the makeup of the jury is slightly